What's up YouTube? I hope you guys are all good. It looks like summer has officially ended here in London. The clouds back, the rain's back, it's feeling a bit cold. But on the positive, the worse the weather, the better the photos. But before we get into the episode, just a couple of updates. Firstly, I completed my project with Microsoft Xbox, and it was one of the biggest photo projects I've done so far. And I'm just so glad to have completed it, especially with the lockdowns and stuff going on. It was a pretty tough task to do. Next up, my X Pro 2 is going to be back from Fujifilm repair this week. So I'm going to be back out taking photos, which brings me on to today's episode, where I'm going to be talking about 5 of my favorite spots in London to take street and city photos. I'll also be including a link down below to a map I made on Google Maps. Finally, all of these locations should show a different side of London. So if you follow this list and you visit all of the locations and you take photos there, you should come out with a varied set of photos. But before we get into the list, you guys can do me a massive favor by hitting that thumbs up button. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button too. So yeah, let's get into this list. And first up, we've got Shoreditch and Brick Lane, which are in the East End of London. So Shoreditch can be kind of likened to Brooklyn in New York, where it used to be like a rundown area and it's been gentrified in recent years. Lots of artists have moved in, there's lots of cafes and good food spots. But the good thing about Shoreditch is it's really colourful. So what you'll realise when walking around central London, especially the touristic areas, is there isn't that much colour about. Most of the buildings are either glass or stone, and even the River Thames is like a colourless grey, muddy brown colour. Whereas Shoreditch is the complete opposite. So in Shoreditch, because there's lots of street art, there's murals, there's eccentric characters walking around with colourful clothing on, there's just lots of colour, and you can get really good shots of people walking past murals or just the characters walking around the streets. So what I like to do is bring like a 35 or a 50 and capture the people walking about, capture people walking past murals, and capture the general street art too. But Shoreditch and Brick Lane especially are some of my favourite places in London to take photos, and you'll see loads of photographers around there as well. It's just very different from the rest of London, and each time you go down there you'll get a different looking photo, and yeah, it's got good coffee too, so it's a win-win. So next up we've got the Barbican, which is a housing estate in central London. So after the Second World War there was loads of these housing estates built all across London. But most of them at this point have been either demolished or gentrified beyond recognition. Whereas the Barbican has pretty much retained its original form. And it was originally built for affluent artists in the area, especially in central London. And it pretty much is still like that. So there's lots of artists and musicians who live there now. So the reason I like taking photos in the Barbican is because it looks completely unique, especially compared to all the other buildings in central London. So the Barbican estate is like a big area which you just walk around. It's a bit like a maze because you can get lost in different parts of it. There's lots of tunnels, there's overpasses, cool stairways, there's really tall concrete blocks, and yeah, it just looks really weird. I mean, there's even parts of it which have these weird capsules which look like colonization on Mars or something. It's really weird, but also really good at capturing that urban street feel to London. Also, if you like taking portraits, this is a big favorite among portrait photographers. And yeah, when I go to Barbican, I normally take a wide angle lens in order to capture the architecture. And I also bring a 50mm or even a longer, like a 90, to capture people walking through the tunnels and walking through the overpasses and underpasses. Yeah, it's just a really interesting place to take photos. Another weird thing about the Barbican for me is that it resembles the housing estate I grew up in South London, where there was like these massive areas where you could walk between the different blocks. But it all got demolished around 10 years ago and it's a lot more open plan now, which probably is nicer to walk around in and live in. But it's just one of these things where areas which have been gentrified and which are really clean and modern looking aren't that good for photography. And places which are a bit more old and gritty, I don't know, for me, they have a bit more soul and character to them, which I like taking photos of. But that brings me to my next location on the list, which is actually 2 places which are side by side, and that's Soho and Chinatown. So Soho used to be the red light district in London, and much like Shoreditch, it's been gentrified in recent years, but it has retained some more of its seediness and grittiness. But like with Shoreditch, there's lots of cafes there now, there's lots of artists walking around, There's lots of street art, there's lots of food places. It's generally just a good place to take street photos of the people walking around. The streets are kind of narrow and there's lots of alleyways to take cool photos of people walking down. But yeah, I normally bring like a 50mm or a 35mm with me when I go to Soho. Meanwhile, there's Chinatown, which is a short walk down from Soho, and it's probably one of the most vibrant areas of London. There's just so much life, there's so much people walking around, it's so crowded, so many characters about, and for me it's just one of the best places to take street photos. I took these shots here using the 90mm f2, and it kind of just shows you the kind of photos you can get in Chinatown. Also, Soho and Chinatown are my two favorite places in London to do street photography at nighttime. But let's move on to my fourth location, which is Bank and the area around St. Paul's Cathedral. So if you're looking for that really classic London look, the London you pretty much see in all the TV series and in the films, then Bank and the area around St. Paul's Cathedral are exactly what you're looking for. So a lot of the buildings in this area are old, it's retained its old character. There's lots of people in suits walking about into banks and stuff, and you can capture that really old school London look and feel. As for St. Paul's Cathedral, it just makes for a perfect backdrop for your street photos. Also, the area around it is really cool. So you have the One New Chain shopping center where you can get some really cool reflection shots, or you can go to the top and get a really good shot of St. Paul's and the city from there too. Also, there's loads of cobble streets and narrow roads around St. Paul's Cathedral. It's like a really old school side of London. Don't forget to go inside St. Paul's Cathedral if you're in the area, and go to the very top in order to capture photos of probably the best views of the city. So the final location on this list isn't actually a location, it's the London transport system, and that's because it's just so iconic, especially the London Underground and the Red London buses. When you see a photo of them, you instantly know it's London. And I just love taking photos of people on the trains, on the buses, taking photos of trains coming into the station. I mean, you could easily spend the whole day going from underground station to underground station, taking unique shots along the way. I mean, London's underground, I think, is one of the biggest and most extensive and oldest underground systems around the world. And there literally is so much to see. So that was 5 of my favorite spots in London to take city and street photos. If you guys have any recommendations or any questions, just drop them in the comments below and I'll make sure to get back to you. A massive thanks for watching. Hope you guys all have a great week, and I'll catch you in the next one.